There is something wrong with Family Guy. Not wrong in the way critics argue about. Not wrong in the way fans debate online. Wrong underneath, in the footage itself, in the evidence that has been sitting inside 20-plus seasons of cutaway gags and chicken fights since 1999, waiting for someone to actually stop laughing long enough to look at it. Stewie has been trying to escape a fake reality his entire life. Brian's death was planned years before the car ever came. The show that came back from cancellation in 2005 is not the same show that was canceled in 2002. Peter's stupidity is a daily choice. Meg holds the whole family together by letting them destroy her. And the house on Spooner Street was not empty when the Griffins moved in. 10 theories, every single one grounded in real episodes, real scenes, real canon. Welcome to Red Umbrella. You will not watch this show the same way again. Let's begin. The simulation theory. Stewie knows he's in a show. There is something off about Stewie Griffin. Not off in the way a baby with a British accent and a football-shaped head is obviously off. That part the show wants you to notice. That part is the joke. What is actually off about Stewie runs deeper than the accent and the vocabulary and the casual threats. It lives in the way he looks at the world, the way he sometimes stops mid-scene and addresses something the other characters cannot see, the way he reacts to things that, by every rule the show has established, he should have no way of knowing about. Most people who watch Family Guy file this under comedy. Stewie is a weird baby. The weirdness is the point. Move on. But there is a group of fans who did not move on, who went back through the seasons with a specific question in mind and found that the answer the show keeps almost giving is the same answer every single time. The question is simple.
Why does Stewie know so much?
The answer those fans landed on is not simple at all. Stewie knows so much because Stewie knows everything. He knows everything because he knows what Quahog actually is. And what Quahog actually is, according to this theory, is not real. The simulation theory holds that Quahog is a constructed world, a fake reality, something built and running on a loop, populated by people who have no idea they are inside it. The Griffins go through their lives, make their choices, suffer their consequences, and never once suspect that the ground under their feet is not real ground. The sky over Quahog is not a real sky. The town is not a real town. It is a container, a box, and Stewie Griffin is the only one in the box who knows it is a box. His fourth wall breaks are where the evidence starts. A fourth wall break, in most shows, means a character looks at the camera and makes a joke. It is a comedic device.
Family Guy uses it that way constantly. Characters glance at the camera, react to the audience, acknowledge the absurdity of what is happening. It is a running gag across the whole show.
But Stewie's version of this is different in a specific way that takes a few viewings to catch. When other characters break the fourth wall, they do it in the middle of jokes. The break is the punchline. When Stewie breaks the fourth wall, he sometimes does it before anything funny has happened. He looks at the camera with an expression that is not performing for laughs. He looks at it the way someone looks at a window, like he is checking whether someone is watching, like he already knows someone is watching, and he is simply acknowledging it. In the season 6 two-part episode, Stewie kills Lois and Lois kills Stewie, there is a reveal at the end that reframes everything that just happened. The entire 2 episodes, Stewie actually taking over the world, Lois actually dying, all of it turns out to have been a computer simulation. Stewie built a program that modeled what would happen if he followed through on his plans. He ran a fake version of reality, watched it play out, assessed the results, and shut it down. The show presents this as a plot twist. The theory reads it as something much more uncomfortable. Stewie does not discover simulations in that episode. He builds one with total ease, with no learning curve. He sits down at a computer and constructs a convincing fake reality as though this is something he has done before. Because, the theory argues, it is something he has done before. Because he lives in one. The time machine is the next piece. Stewie owns a working time machine. This is not treated as remarkable within the show. It is simply a fact about Stewie, like the accent or the obsession with world domination. He built it. It works. He uses it. In the Road to the Multiverse episode in season 8, Stewie and Brian do not just travel through time. They travel through entirely different versions of reality. They visit a Quahog where humans never existed. A Quahog that runs like a cartoon. A Quahog that functions by completely different rules than the one they came from. Stewie navigates all of these with calm. He knows how to move between realities. He knows the rules of each one. He knows how to get back. None of this surprises him. It is expertise, not discovery. A 1-year-old baby built a machine that can access multiple versions of reality and moves through them them with the confidence of someone who has done it hundreds of times. The show wants you to laugh at this. The theory wants you to ask why he is so calm about it. The answer the theory gives is that Stewie has been trying to find the edge of the simulation for a very long time. The time machine is not an invention. It is the latest version of a tool he keeps rebuilding. Every timeline he visits,
every alternate Quahog he walks through, is another attempt to find something that exists outside the construct. And every time, he ends up back on Spooner Street, back in the Griffin house, back inside the box. The multiverse, in this reading, is not infinite freedom. It is infinite versions of the same prison. Stewie keeps traveling because the door has to be somewhere. He has not found it yet. His relationship with Brian is the emotional core of this theory, and the part that makes it genuinely sad rather than just clever. Brian is the only character Stewie consistently treats as real. Not as a prop, not as an obstacle, not as part of the scenery, as an actual person whose existence matters to him. In the Brian and Stewie episode from season 9, the two of them are locked in a bank vault together for an entire episode with no cutaway gags, no B-plot, no jokes to hide behind, just two characters talking. Stewie admits things in that episode he admits nowhere else. Brian asks him directly about whether life feels pointless to him. Stewie does not deflect. He answers, and the answer carries the specific weight of someone who has been carrying it for a long time. If Stewie knows the world around him is not real, then Brian is the only thing in it he has decided to treat as though it matters. Not because Brian is necessarily more real than anyone else, but because Stewie made a choice, somewhere along the way, to let one thing count. That choice, and the fear underneath it, the fear of losing the one real thing in a fake world, explains the mercy pact Stewie reveals at the end of that episode. He carries a gun specifically for Brian, not to threaten him, to protect him from himself, if it ever comes to that. That is not the behavior of someone who finds the world meaningless. That is the behavior of someone who found one thing that means something and is terrified of what happens if it disappears. The behavioral evidence across the full run of the show is consistent in a way that is hard to explain as accident. Stewie reacts to the cutaway gags, those rapid-fire sequences that exist completely outside the show's story, in ways that suggest he registers them as interruptions. Other characters do not notice cutaways because, within the world of the show, cutaways do not exist. They are a device for the audience. Stewie occasionally flinches at them, occasionally references them after they happen, occasionally seems to be waiting for them to finish so the scene can continue.
He experiences the show's own structure as something that keeps happening to him, rather than something he is part of. He also references the writers, not constantly, not in a way that drives the plot, but in scattered moments across multiple seasons where he speaks about the people controlling his reality, as though they are real and present, and occasionally making his life difficult. This could be a running gag. It probably is, on the surface. But the theory points out that characters who are purely unaware of their constructed nature do not make jokes about the people constructing them. They cannot. The joke requires a kind of knowledge that only makes sense if some part of Stewie actually possesses it. What makes this theory land harder than most Family Guy fan theories is that it does not require you to believe the writers planned it. The writers did not sit down in 1998 and decide that Stewie Griffin would be a self-aware prisoner of a simulated reality. They decided he would be a funny, evil baby who breaks the fourth wall sometimes. But the accumulated weight of 20-plus seasons of those choices, the time machine, the multiverse travel, the simulation he built, the fourth wall breaks that land differently from everyone else's, the one genuine emotional bond in a world he otherwise treats as furniture, adds up to something the writers may not have intended but cannot take back.
The pattern is in the footage. It has been building since season 1, and once you see it, Stewie stops being a funny, evil baby and becomes something stranger and lonelier. A baby who has always known the world is fake, who built a machine to find the exit, who has been to 100 different versions of the same fake town and come back empty-handed every time, who chose one dog to love in a reality full of constructs, and who carries a gun in case that dog ever stops wanting to be here. That is not a comedy character. That is something else entirely. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And if Stewie being trapped in a simulation is the darkest thing the show accidentally built into its most iconic character, wait until you hear the theory about what the writers were quietly doing to Brian Griffin for years before they finally pulled the trigger. Because the clues were there. They were always there. And once you know where to look, you cannot watch a single early Brian episode the same way again. Section 2. Brian was always going to die. The planted clues theory. Most people remember where they were when Brian Griffin died. Not in a dramatic, world-stopping way, but in the specific way that happens when a piece of media you grew up with does something you genuinely did not see coming. On November 24th, 2013, in the episode titled Life of Brian, a car hits Brian in the street outside the Griffin house. He is rushed to the vet. The family gathers. He looks up at them, says goodbye, and dies on the table. The show then moves forward. The Griffins adopt a new dog named Vinny. Life continues. Brian Griffin, one of the two most important characters in the entire run of Family Guy, is gone. He came back 3 episodes later. Stewie used his time machine to go back and push Brian out of the way of the car, restoring him to the timeline and returning the show to normal. Most viewers exhaled. The internet, which had spent 3 weeks in varying states of grief and outrage, settled down. Seth MacFarlane said publicly that the whole arc was a reminder not to take the things you love for granted. The writers called it a creative risk. Everyone more or less accepted that Family Guy had pulled a stunt, discovered it went too far, and quietly reversed it. But a significant portion of the fandom never accepted that explanation. Not because the explanation is obviously a lie, but because when you go back through the seasons before Brian's death with the knowledge of what is coming, what you find in the footage is not random. It is too consistent to be random. The moments are too specific. The emotional groundwork is too carefully laid. What you find, if you go looking, is a show that was saying goodbye to Brian Griffin for years before the car ever hit him. The earliest piece of evidence most fans point to is the season 9 episode Brian and Stewie. It aired in 2011, 2 years before the death episode, and it is unlike almost anything else Family Guy ever made. There are no cutaway gags. There is no B-plot. There is no other story running alongside the main one. The entire episode is just Brian and Stewie locked inside a bank vault over a weekend, talking to each other. No distractions, no escape, just 2 characters alone with each other and whatever they actually feel. In that episode, Stewie asks Brian directly whether he has ever thought about ending his life. Brian does not laugh it off. He does not change the subject. He admits, clearly and without much hesitation, that yes, he has thought about it. The conversation that follows is not played for laughs. It is played straight, and by the end of it, Stewie reveals something that the show had never mentioned before and would not explain further afterward. He carries a gun, not for enemies, not for adventures, specifically for Brian. He carries it so that if Brian ever reaches the point where he truly wants to die, Stewie will be the one to do it, because he loves him, and he does not want Brian to suffer. It is a mercy pact between a baby and a dog, delivered in complete seriousness. In an episode that removed every comedic safety net the show normally hides behind. Ask yourself why that episode exists. What creative purpose does it serve in a comedy show about a dysfunctional family in Rhode Island? The straightforward answer is that the writers wanted to explore the depth of the Stewie and Brian relationship in a stripped-down format. That is probably true, but it does not explain why the specific content of that exploration involves Brian's suicidal thoughts and a gun Stewie keeps loaded for the express purpose of ending Brian's life when the time comes. If you are writing a show and you know a character is going to die in 2 years, the episode you make 2 years early is exactly this one. You establish the emotional stakes. You confirm how much this relationship matters. You make the audience feel the weight of what is coming before they know anything is coming. The Stewie and Brian episode is the most direct evidence, but it is not the only one. Season 8, episode 17, titled Brian's Got a Brand New Bag, puts Brian in a relationship with a significantly older woman. The comedy of the episode comes from the age gap and the awkwardness around it, but inside the episode, Brian has a moment where he confronts aging directly. He thinks about how much time he has left. He thinks about what he has not done. It is brief, and it is surrounded by jokes, so it slides past on first viewing. On a second viewing, knowing what is coming, it lands like a door being left slightly open. The show is letting you glimpse something it is not ready to say out loud yet. There is also the broader pattern of how the show treats Brian across season 11. This is harder to pin to a single episode because it is a tonal shift rather than a specific moment. But across that season, the show pulls back its affection for Brian in a way that feels deliberate. His pretensions are mocked more sharply. The novel he has been supposedly writing for years becomes more of a punchline and less of a character detail. His romantic failures are treated less sympathetically. His opinions, which earlier seasons at least engaged with even when disagreeing, are dismissed more casually. The show is not destroying Brian. It is creating distance. The kind of distance you create between an audience and a character when you are preparing to remove that character. You do not want the removal to be clean. You want it to be complicated. You want the audience to grieve someone they had just started to find slightly annoying, because that specific combination of feelings is far more painful than simple grief. Then there is
Vinny. Vinny is the dog the Griffins adopt after Brian dies. He is voiced by Tony Sirico, who at that point was one of the most recognizable voices in American television from his years on The Sopranos. He has a full personality, a distinct way of speaking, a specific dynamic with each member of the family, and a relationship with Stewie that the show develops across the 3 episodes he appears in before Brian returns. This is not a character thrown together in a panic. You do not call Tony Sirico for a character thrown together in a panic. You call Tony Sirico when you have a character with enough depth and enough planned screen time to justify the casting. Vinny's existence is evidence that the death arc was in development long before the episode aired, because the replacement was too fully formed to have been built in the weeks between the writers deciding to kill Brian and the episode going into production. The counter-argument that fans who accept the official story make is this: television production timelines mean that the Vinny episodes were already deep in production before the audience reacted, which explains why he was developed enough to seem planned. This is a fair point. Animation takes months. The Vinny episodes could not have been made in response to audience reaction because they were already being made. But this counter-argument actually supports the theory more than it challenges it. If the Vinny episodes were already in production before the audience reacted, that means the writers had fully developed Brian's replacement well before the death episode aired. Which means the death was planned far enough in advance to develop a replacement character to the point of securing significant voice talent, which is exactly what the theory argues. The return is the part most people use to dismiss the theory. Brian came back. If the death was planned as a permanent story move, why reverse it? The theory's answer is that the return does not cancel the planning. The plan did not necessarily require Brian to stay dead forever. What it required was for the audience to feel his absence, to sit with a version of the show that did not have Brian in it and understand in a very direct way what that meant. The lesson McFarlane said he wanted viewers to take away, do not take the things you love for granted, is not a lesson you can deliver if the thing comes back immediately. You need the 3 episodes. You need Vinny. You need the Griffins adjusting. And then you bring Brian back, and the audience watches every subsequent Brian scene with a different kind of attention. They know now. They have been shown that he can be taken away. That knowledge does not leave. What this theory changes, if you accept it, is every Brian scene that came before the death episode. Every conversation he has with Stewie about what matters. Every episode where he stares at his unfinished novel. Every moment where the show lets you see that Brian is trying to be something and keeps falling short. The show was not just making jokes about a dog with intellectual pretensions. It was building a portrait of a character running out of time without knowing it. And the people writing those scenes may well have known exactly what was coming, laying the groundwork one quiet episode at a time, trusting that the audience would only understand what they had been watching once it was too late. The car comes out of nowhere in the episode. That is how the scene is filmed. Fast, random, no warning. But the theory says the car was never random. The car was always coming. The show just made sure you were not looking at the road. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, one, underscore, underscore. And Brian's death being potentially planned for years raises a much bigger question about this show's history. Because if the writers were capable of quietly building towards something that major across multiple seasons without the audience noticing, what does that say about the version of Family Guy that exists now compared to the one that was canceled in 2002? Because the show that came back in 2005 looks the same on the surface. Same characters, same house, same town. But something underneath changed in ways most viewers never stopped to examine. And once you start examining it, the 2 versions of the show start feeling less like one story and more like 2 completely different ones wearing the same face. Section 3. The canceled timeline. The show that came back is not the same show. Family Guy was canceled in 2002. This is not a theory. This is fact. Fox pulled the show after 3 seasons, citing low ratings. The episodes that had already been made continued to air in reruns on Adult Swim, the late-night programming block on Cartoon Network. Those reruns performed extremely well. DVD sales of the first 3 seasons performed even better. The numbers were impossible to ignore. In 2005, Fox brought Family Guy back. Seth MacFarlane returned. The original voice cast returned. The Griffin family returned to the same house on Spooner Street in the same town of Quahog, Rhode Island. Everything looked identical. And yet, if you sit down and watch the last episode of Season 3 and then immediately watch the first episode of Season 4,
something feels wrong. Not wrong in a way that is easy to name right away. Wrong in the way that happens when something familiar has been slightly rearranged and you cannot immediately identify what moved. The colors are the same, the voices are the same, the theme song is the same, but the show underneath all of that is operating on a different frequency. The characters make different kinds of choices. The stories are built differently. The emotional center of gravity has shifted. And the longer you watch into Season 4 and beyond, the more that wrongness compounds. The canceled timeline theory says this feeling is not imaginary. It says that what returned in 2005 was not the same show that was canceled in 2002. Not because anyone made a deliberate decision to change it, but because you cannot freeze a creative thing for 3 years and then thaw it out and expect it to be identical. The people who came back were not the same people who left. The culture they were writing for had moved. The instincts they had developed during the gap were different instincts. What returned in 2005 was a very good imitation of Family Guy. It was not Family Guy. Start with Peter. Peter Griffin in seasons 1 through 3 is not a smart man. This is established clearly and consistently, but his lack of intelligence in those seasons operates within recognizable human limits. He does not think before he acts, he misunderstands situations, he makes choices that are obviously wrong to everyone except him, but you can follow the logic. You can see what Peter thought was going to happen, even when what actually happens is a disaster. There is a human being in there making human mistakes. The Peter of those early seasons loves his family in ways the show makes visible through his behavior. He is at Meg's events even when he does not want to be. He fights for his friendship with Cleveland and Quagmire, even when he handles it clumsily. He tries to connect with Chris, even when he has no idea how. The effort is there. The love is clumsy and often counterproductive, but it is present and it is real. Post-revival Peter operates differently. His inability to think is no longer the stupidity of a man who acts before considering consequences. It becomes something closer to a total absence of inner life. He does things in later seasons that early Peter would not do. Not because early Peter was smarter, but because early Peter had a floor. There were things he would not do to his family, even by accident, because underneath the impulsiveness, there was affection. Post-revival Peter loses that floor across the later seasons. He does genuinely harmful things to Lois, to Meg, to his friends, and the show frames these things as comedy without the early seasons habit of letting the consequences land. The character becomes a delivery system for whatever joke the episode needs, rather than a person the joke is happening to. Cleveland and Joe show this even more clearly because they are less central and therefore less carefully maintained. In the early seasons, Cleveland is the emotional steadiness in the group of 4 friends. He is warm, he is measured. When Peter goes too far, Cleveland is often the one who notices. He has a specific function in the group dynamic, and that function is consistent. Post-revival, Cleveland drifts. His personality becomes less defined. By the time he gets his own spin-off show, The Cleveland Show, the character has wandered so far from his original construction that the spin-off essentially has to rebuild him from scratch, which is part of why the spin-off feels disconnected from the Family Guy it came from. Joe in the early seasons has a specificity to him that the later seasons flatten. His situation, being a paraplegic cop who refuses to let his disability define his self-worth, is handled with actual care in the early episodes. It is part of who he is without being the only thing he is. Post-revival Joe is increasingly reduced to his situation as a source of jokes rather than a source of character. The structural change is the most important one, and the least discussed. Family Guy in seasons 1 through 3 uses cutaway gags. This is well established. The show did not invent the cutaway, but it made the format famous. However, in those early seasons, the cutaways serve the episode. They interrupt the story, yes, but the story survives the interruption. You could remove most of the cutaways from a season 2 episode and still have a complete functional story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The emotional content of the episode does not live inside the cutaways. It lives in the scenes between them. The cutaways are seasoning. The story is the meal. Post-revival, this relationship inverts. The cutaways stop being interruptions to the story and start being the point of the episode. Later seasons of Family Guy can be broken down into a collection of cutaway gags held together by the
thinnest possible thread of plot. Remove the cutaways from a season 10 episode, and in many cases, you do not have a functional story left. You have a skeleton. The meal has become the seasoning, and the seasoning has become the meal. This is not the same structural philosophy as early Family Guy. It is a different show's way of operating, and it arrived specifically with the revival. The reason this happened is not mysterious if you consider what occurred during the 3-year gap. Seth MacFarlane spent that time creating American Dad, which premiered in 2005, the same year Family Guy returned. American Dad is a more disciplined show in terms of story structure. It commits more fully to its plots. It uses its characters more consistently. MacFarlane was developing as a writer and showrunner during the gap, and the creative instincts he was developing pulled in a different direction than the instincts that made early Family Guy. When he returned to Family Guy, he brought those new instincts with him. The result was a show that looked like the original, but thought about itself differently. Quagmire is where the theory becomes most uncomfortable. Glenn Quagmire, in seasons 1 through 3, is an exaggerated character. His behavior is outrageous. The show plays it for comedy, but he exists within a recognizable human frame. He is a character who makes terrible choices with a kind of commitment to those choices that the show finds absurd and funny.
He is not presented as a good person. He is presented as a specific kind of bad person, played broadly for laughs. This is consistent across the early seasons. Post-revival, Quagmire becomes something the show itself cannot quite decide how to handle. There are later episodes where his behavior is framed as genuinely dark rather than comedically dark, where the show seems to be acknowledging that what it used to play as jokes is actually troubling. And then, without resolving that acknowledgement, the show goes back to playing the same behavior for laughs in the next episode. The character exists in a state of permanent inconsistency in the later seasons that the early seasons never had. Early Quagmire is a consistent comedic creation. Late Quagmire is a character the show inherited and no longer fully understands. The theory does not require anyone to have made a conscious choice to produce a different show. That is what makes it more interesting than a simple conspiracy. Nobody sat in a writer's room in 2005 and said they were going to change who these characters were. They sat down and tried to make the same show they had made before. But 3 years had passed. The people in that room had changed. The television landscape had changed. The instincts and habits and ideas about what a show should do had shifted in ways nobody could fully account for. The result was a version of Family Guy that was produced in good faith as a continuation and is, in practice, something different. What the theory asks you to sit with is the idea that the Family Guy most people think of, the version that dominated conversation for the decade after the revival, the version that produced most of the famous moments and most shared clips, is not the show that earned the original audience's loyalty. The show that earned that loyalty was quieter, more grounded, more interested in its characters as people than as vehicles for jokes. It ran for 3 seasons, got canceled, and never actually came back. What came back used its name and wore its face and genuinely tried to honor what it had been. But trying to be something and being that thing are not the same. The gap between them is exactly 3 years wide, and once you see it in every episode that came after. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The idea that the show changed so completely after the cancellation raises a question nobody really wants to answer. If the characters we see in later seasons are different versions of themselves, running on different internal logic than the originals, what does that mean for the moments when one of those characters seems to be smarter than they should be? Because there is a theory about Peter Griffin specifically, about his stupidity and whether it is real or performed, that becomes significantly darker when you consider that the Peter doing the performing might not be the same Peter the show started with. That is where we are going next. Section 4. Peter is actually intelligent. The strategic stupidity theory. Peter Griffin does not know how to read, except when he does. In the season 4 episode, Peter's Got Woods, Peter reads a letter out loud without any difficulty. In other episodes, across the same general period of the show, Peter cannot understand basic written instructions, struggles with simple signs, and behaves as though the written word is a foreign object. The show never addresses this inconsistency. It moves past it the way it moves past most things, quickly and without comment, trusting that the audience will not hold 2 episodes up against each other and ask why the same man can and cannot perform the same basic task depending on what the plot needs. Most viewers do not notice, or they notice and chalk it up to lazy writing. Inconsistencies in long-running animated shows are common and usually meaningless. Characters forget things the plot requires them to forget. They know things the plot requires them to know. It is the nature of the format. But the strategic stupidity theory does not read Peter's inconsistencies as lazy writing.
writing. It reads them as evidence. Specifically, it reads them as evidence that Peter Griffin's stupidity is not a fixed trait. It is a performance, a choice he makes, consciously or not, that serves a very specific purpose in his life. The theory holds that Peter Griffin is not actually as unintelligent as he appears, that underneath the accidents and the childlike behavior and the inability to handle basic adult situations, there is a man who understands exactly what his stupidity gets him out of, and who has been using it across the entire run of the show to avoid the one thing he fears most: responsibility. The evidence starts with the moments of competence that the show cannot quite hide. These are scattered across multiple seasons, and they share a common feature. Peter displays real ability when the situation involves something he actually cares about. In the Season 2 episode Running Mates, Peter runs a campaign. He gives speeches, he understands the mechanics of getting people on his side. He is not fumbling through this. He is operating with a level of social awareness and planning that his everyday behavior never suggests he possesses. In the Season 3 episode Mr. Griffin Goes to Washington, Peter navigates a corporate environment and ultimately outmaneuvers people who are significantly more formally educated than he is. He reads the room. He identifies what people want and uses that knowledge. These are not the actions of a man who cannot think. In multiple episodes across the show's run, Peter displays specific knowledge of legal processes. He knows what forms to file. He knows what rights he has. He knows, in particular, the situations where his behavior technically falls within the law, even when it is obviously unreasonable. This is not something a man with Peter's presented level of intelligence should know. Legal knowledge requires attention, memory, and the ability to apply rules to situations. Peter demonstrates all three in these moments, and then in the next scene, forgets how a dishwasher works. The physical evidence is harder to dismiss. Peter Griffin is a large man, and the show treats his size as part of his comedy. But across multiple episodes, Peter demonstrates physical abilities that require a significant level of body awareness and control. In the episode Peter Problems from Season 12, Peter takes on a farm job and performs physical labor with a level of competence the episode itself seems surprised by. In various fight sequences across the show, Peter handles himself in ways that require coordination and spatial awareness. These are not complicated observations, but they matter because they establish that Peter's body does what Peter's mind tells it to. When Peter wants to do something physical, he can do it. The clumsiness and the accidents are not the behavior of a man with no physical control. They are the behavior of a man who is not paying attention. And the theory asks why he is so consistently not paying attention to the things that would make him a functional adult. The answer is that not paying attention is protecting him from something. Look at what Peter's stupidity gets him out of. He does not have to manage the family finances in any serious way because Lois handles them, and everyone has accepted that Peter cannot be trusted with numbers. He does not have to make difficult parenting decisions because the show has established that Peter's judgment cannot be relied upon. He does not have to engage with his children's problems in any sustained or serious way because everyone around him has long since stopped expecting that from him. He does not have to manage conflict in his marriage with any real emotional intelligence because his inability to do so is treated as a fixed condition rather than a choice. Every area of adult life that requires sustained effort, emotional presence, or genuine accountability has been quietly handed off to Lois or to circumstances or simply abandoned. And the mechanism that made all of this handing off acceptable is Peter's stupidity. The episode that the theory returns to most often is Petarded from Season 4. In this episode, Peter takes an IQ test and scores low enough to be classified as legally having an intellectual disability. He then uses this classification deliberately. He does things he knows are wrong and uses his new legal status as a shield. The episode plays this as comedy. Peter discovers a loophole and exploits it with obvious awareness of what he is doing. He is not confused about what his classification means. He is not accidentally stumbling into using it as protection. He understands the system and he uses the system. That is not the behavior of someone who cannot think. That is the behavior of someone who has found a structure that protects him and is smart enough to lean into it. The show frames the Petarded episode as Peter being Peter, finding something absurd and taking it too far. But the theory points out that the only reason the plot of that episode works is if Peter understands, on some level, what he is doing. A genuinely unintelligent person does not strategically deploy a legal classification. They do not understand what the classification means clearly enough to use it as cover. Peter uses it as cover immediately, with confidence, in exactly the situations where cover is most useful to him. That requires comprehension. His relationship with Lois is where the theory becomes most psychologically interesting. Lois is presented across the show as the competent one, the adult in the relationship, the person who keeps the household running while Peter lurches from disaster to disaster. This dynamic is the foundation of the show's family comedy. But watch how Peter behaves when Lois is struggling. Watch how he behaves in the episodes where Lois is not managing everything, where circumstances have removed her from the role of household anchor. In several of these episodes, Peter quietly steps into the gap, not loudly, not in a way the show celebrates or even fully acknowledges.
He handles things. He makes calls. He keeps situations from completely falling apart. And then, when Lois is back and the structure of the household reasserts itself, he steps back out and returns to his default presentation. The Season 8 episode Amish Guy has Peter spending time in an Amish community. Stripped of modern conveniences and the social role he plays at home, Peter adapts. He learns skills. He participates effectively. He is not lost or helpless in an environment that requires genuine practical competence. He functions. And then he goes back to Quahog and goes back to being Peter Griffin, the man who cannot function. The cruelest version of the theory is the one that takes it all the way. If Peter is performing stupidity as a shield against responsibility, then every terrible thing that has happened to his family as a result of his behavior was avoidable. Meg's social suffering, which Peter actively contributes to across the show's run, Chris's lack of guidance and direction, the financial stress that Lois carries, the marriage damage that accumulates across seasons of Peter's choices. All of it sits differently if Peter has the capacity to do better and is choosing, on some level, not to. Not because he does not love his family. The theory does not require Peter to be a monster. It only requires that love and avoidance can exist in the same person simultaneously. That a man can genuinely care about his children and also be genuinely relieved that his established identity means nobody expects him to show up for them in difficult ways. The show itself seems to gesture at this in the Season 14 episode Peter Rabbit. Peter, in a moment of unusual clarity, makes a decision about his family that is quiet and considered and correct. It is not played for laughs. It is just Peter, for one moment, handling something the way a capable adult handles it. And then the episode moves on, and Peter goes back to being Peter, and the moment is not referenced again. The theory says these moments are the real Peter, not accidents, not anomalies, glimpses of what is underneath the performance, surfacing briefly before being pushed back down. What this theory does to the entire show is significant. Family Guy is structured around the comedy of a stupid man making stupid choices in a world that mostly absorbs the damage. If the stupidity is chosen rather than fixed, then the comedy has a different texture underneath it. It is no longer the comedy of chaos. It is the comedy of a man who built a very specific life around a very specific version of himself and has maintained that version so completely and for so long that even the people closest to him cannot see past it. That is funny, in a way. It is also, if you sit with it, genuinely sad. The most capable person in the Griffin house might be Peter. And the most capable person in the Griffin house has spent decades making sure nobody finds out.
Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if Peter's stupidity is a shield he built for himself, the next theory suggests someone else in the Griffin house never got to build a shield at all. Someone who absorbs everything the family cannot handle, carries everything they will not carry, and holds the whole structure together by being the one person it is always acceptable to fall apart on. The theory about Meg Griffin is not about what she hides. It is about what she is used for, and it is darker than anything Peter has been doing. Section 5. Meg is the family's psychological scapegoat. There is an episode in Season 7 called Meg and Quagmire, where Meg, for a brief window of time, is treated as a normal person by someone outside the family. Quagmire, of all people, shows genuine interest in her. He compliments her, he pays attention to her, he makes her feel like she exists in a way that the rest of her life consistently denies her. The episode eventually resolves in a way that removes the possibility of anything real developing, which is how every episode involving Meg and any positive experience resolves. But for a window in the middle of that episode, something unusual happens. Meg smiles in a way she almost never smiles. She carries herself differently. She speaks with a kind of ease that her scenes in the Griffin house never produce. The contrast is stark enough that it stops being funny and starts being something else. Because the question it raises is not why Quagmire is interested in Meg. The question it raises is why Meg being treated like a normal person feels so unusual that the show has to frame it as a plot event. Why is basic human decency toward Meg remarkable enough to build an episode around? What is the Griffin house doing to her that makes ordinary kindness feel like an extraordinary exception? The scapegoat theory answers that question directly, and the answer is not comfortable. A scapegoat, in the psychological sense, is a person within a family or group who absorbs all of the dysfunction that the group cannot process within itself. Every family has things it cannot look at directly: shame about failures, anger that has nowhere acceptable to go, fear about what the family actually is versus what it presents itself as. These things need somewhere to live. In healthy families, they get processed. People talk about them. They get worked through. In unhealthy families, they get redirected, pushed onto one person who becomes the container for everything the rest of the family refuses to carry. That person gets treated poorly, not because they deserve it, but because the family needs someone to treat poorly. The mistreatment is not personal, it is structural.
Meg Griffin is that person in the Griffin family, and the show, across its entire run, builds more evidence for this than it probably intended. Start with the consistency of it. Meg is not mistreated occasionally in episodes specifically about her mistreatment. She is mistreated as background noise, as the default setting of the household. In episodes that are not about Meg at all, her mistreatment appears in passing as a joke that requires no setup because the audience has already accepted it as the natural state of things. Peter forgets her name. Lois dismisses her feelings with the casual ease of someone who has been doing it so long it requires no thought. Chris insults her reflexively. Even Brian, who is presented as the most emotionally aware member of the household, participates in the Meg pile-on without much friction. The cruelty toward Meg is not an event in the Griffin house. It is the atmosphere.
This consistency is what separates the scapegoat theory from a simple observation about a character being treated badly. The theory is not just saying that Meg has it rough. It is saying that the roughness serves a function, that the Griffin family needs Meg to be the lowest point in the household hierarchy, because without that lowest point, the hierarchy collapses. Every member of the family has something they are ashamed of, or afraid of, or unable to face. Peter's failures as a father and husband, Lois's suppressed rage, and her history, touched on in various episodes, of being a deeply imperfect person beneath the composed surface. Chris's social struggles and lack of direction. Stewie's situation is its own category. Brian's fundamental inability to be what he presents himself as. All of this needs somewhere to go. It goes to Meg.
The episode that makes this most explicit is the Season 9 episode Meg and Peter, more commonly referenced by fans as the one where Meg finally snaps and tells the family exactly what they are. The scene is remarkable in the context of the show because it is played completely straight. Meg does not yell, she does not cry, she sits down and, with the calm of someone who has thought about this for a very long time, explains to each member of the family what they actually are beneath the versions of themselves they present. She tells Peter he is a man-child who never grew up. She tells Lois that her niceness is a performance that masks how deeply selfish she is. She goes through the family with a clarity and a precision that the show, in that moment, does not undercut. The family does not laugh her off. They sit there. They absorb it. They look, for a moment, like people who have just been accurately described by someone they had been dismissing. And then the scene ends.
And the next episode, everything is back to normal.
Meg is back at the bottom. The family is back to treating her the way they always treat her. The show does not acknowledge what just happened. It does not follow up on it. It buries it and moves on. The scapegoat theory says this burial is the most important moment in the entire arc, because what that scene reveals, and what the show cannot follow up on without dismantling its own premise, is that Meg sees the family clearly. She is not deluded about what is happening to her. She is not oblivious to the mistreatment. She understands it, she can articulate it with precision, and she chooses, after that scene, to go back into the household and continue absorbing it.
The theory's darkest reading of this is that Meg knows exactly what her role is, and stays in it. Not because she has no choice, but because some part of her understands that if she stops playing her role, the family falls apart. And despite everything, she does not want the family to fall apart. Look at what happens in the episodes where the family is forced to confront Meg's absence, or the possibility of losing her. In the Season 6 episode Peter's Daughter, Meg falls into a coma after an accident. The family's response is not relief. It is not the response of people who have been freed from an inconvenience. They are distressed. Peter, in particular, reacts with a guilt and a grief that his behavior toward Meg in normal circumstances never suggests he is capable of. He sits by her bed. He talks to her. He tells her things he would never say while she is awake and the household hierarchy is operating normally.
The moment she is gone from the dynamic reveals that it needed her more than it ever acknowledged.
This is how scapegoating works in real psychological terms. The person at the bottom of the hierarchy is not valued while they are present. Their presence is taken for granted because their function is to absorb what nobody else will carry. But remove them, and the system goes into crisis. The things they were absorbing have nowhere to go. They start circulating among the remaining members of the group, and nobody is equipped to handle them because nobody has been handling them. They have been handing them off.
Without Meg, the Griffin family's unprocessed dysfunction would have to be processed by the Griffins. There is significant evidence across the show that none of them are capable of doing that. Lois is the most complicated piece of this theory. Lois is presented as the good parent, the reasonable one, the adult who holds the family together while Peter spins out. And in many ways she is, but her treatment of Meg does not fit the portrait of a caring, present mother. Lois dismisses Meg's feelings with a speed and a consistency that goes beyond being overwhelmed or distracted. In multiple episodes, Lois has the opportunity to defend Meg, to stand up for her, to simply acknowledge that what is happening to her daughter is not acceptable. She does not take these opportunities. She participates in the dismissal, sometimes actively. She treats Meg's pain as an inconvenience, or worse, as something Meg is bringing on herself. The psychological reading of this is that Lois needs Meg in the scapegoat role as much as anyone. Lois carries a tremendous amount of suppressed material. Her history before the Griffin marriage, touched on across multiple episodes, involves a version of herself she has buried. Her marriage requires a continuous performance of patience and reasonableness in the face of Peter's behavior. She has rage she cannot express, shame she cannot acknowledge, and fear she cannot face. All of that has to go somewhere. Meg is where it goes. The dismissal of Meg is not Lois failing as a mother. It is Lois functioning as a member of the family system. A system that has organized itself around Meg's availability as a container. The season 11 episode Seahorse Seashell Party is the piece of evidence the theory most depends on. The family is trapped in the house during a storm. Meg, again, reaches a breaking point and confronts the family. What follows is a long sequence where she tells each of them painful truths. The family reacts badly. They turn on each other. Without Meg as the shared target, the family's dysfunction immediately redirects inward. Peter and Lois go at each other. Chris collapses emotionally. The household, without its scapegoat absorbing the pressure, begins to tear itself apart within minutes. And then Meg, watching this happen, makes a choice. She apologizes. She takes back what she said. She steps back into her role. The family stabilizes. The storm passes. Everything goes back to the way it was. The show frames this as Meg being selfless, as her being, in some strange way, the strongest person in the house, because she is the one willing to sacrifice her own well-being for the family's stability. But the scapegoat theory frames it as something more troubling. It frames it as a person who has been in their role so long, who has been shaped by that role so completely that they return to it even when they have the chance to leave. Not because they are weak, because the role has become their identity. Meg Griffin knows she is the scapegoat. She has always known. And she keeps choosing to stay because the alternative, a family that has to face itself without her in the way, is something she cannot bring herself to force on them. That is not a punchline. That is a portrait of someone quietly holding a damaged structure together with their own body. The show put it in a comedy episode and surrounded it with jokes and moved on. But what it described in that storm episode is one of the most recognizable dynamics in real family psychology. And the fact that it is sitting in the middle of a cartoon about a talking dog and a time-traveling baby makes it somehow worse. __quote _for __. If Meg is holding the family together by being its lowest point, that raises an uncomfortable question about the town surrounding the Griffin house. Because Quahog itself, as a place, has some deeply strange properties that go beyond any one family's dysfunction. Things reset in Quahog. People survive things they should not survive. The same mistakes get made in the same ways by the same people across decades without anything permanently changing. And there is a theory that explains why. It does not involve simulations this time. It involves something older and stranger than that. The town of Quahog might not be a place where people live. It might be a place where they are kept. Section 6. Quahog is purgatory. Nobody in Quahog ever really changes. Think about that for a moment. Family Guy has been running since 1999. That is over 2 decades of episodes. Over 2 decades of Peter making catastrophic decisions, Quagmire behaving badly, Joe trying to hold his life together, Cleveland being reasonable in unreasonable situations. Over 2 decades of the Griffin family cycling through crises, confrontations, revelations, and rock bottoms. And at the end of all of it, everyone is exactly where they started. Same house, same jobs, same relationships, same patterns, same mistakes. Nothing accumulates. Nothing permanently changes. Nobody grows in any direction that sticks. In a live-action drama, this would be a writing failure. In a sitcom, it is a format convention. The reset button exists so the show can keep going without continuity becoming a burden. Most viewers accept this as part of the deal with long-running animated comedy. You do not watch Family Guy for character development. You watch it for the jokes.
jokes. The reset is the price of admission.
But the purgatory theory does not read the reset as a format convention.
It reads it as the point. It reads the inability of anyone in Quahog to permanently change, to genuinely escape their patterns, to move forward in any direction that holds, as the defining feature of what Quahog actually is. Not a town in Rhode Island, a place between places. A space where souls cycle through the same experiences, the same failures, the same relationships, over and over, in a loop that has no clear exit. Purgatory, in the traditional sense, is not punishment. It is a waiting room, a place where something is being worked through, slowly, across an indefinite period of time. Quahog, by this reading, is exactly that. The Griffins and everyone around them are not living their lives. They are working through something, and they have been working through it for a very long time without getting anywhere close to finished.
The first piece of evidence is the town's relationship with death. Characters in Quahog die with a regularity that should be alarming, and is instead treated as entirely normal. Peter has died, in various forms and to various degrees, across multiple episodes. He has been declared legally dead. He has had near-death experiences that the show depicts with genuine visual detail, complete with tunnels of light and the whole established imagery of crossing over. He always comes back, not through any extraordinary means, not through Stewie's time machine or any other in-universe explanation. He simply comes back because Quahog does not allow permanent death. Death in Quahog is a temporary condition, a situation that resolves itself by the next scene or the next episode, without explanation and without consequence. This is true across the whole cast. Quagmire has survived situations that would kill a real person without hesitation.
Joe, a paraplegic man, has been placed in physical situations across various episodes that defy any reasonable understanding of what his body can do, and survives them all. Cleveland fell out of a bathtub through the second floor of his house and into his yard in a running gag that appeared across multiple episodes before his spin-off. Every time, he survived. The show treats survival in Quahog as the default setting.
Death, when it occasionally sticks, is the remarkable exception. And even then, as Brian's death demonstrated, the exception is not always permanent. In a purgatory framework, this makes complete sense. You cannot die in purgatory because you are already in the space after death. The experiences you have there can hurt. They can feel real. They can carry genuine emotional weight, but they cannot end you because the ending has already happened. Whatever brought the residents of Quahog to this place has already occurred. What they are doing now is cycling, going through the motions of a life, experiencing its pleasures and its pains, without the ability to either fully live it or fully escape it. The episode Business Guy from Season 8 is one of the pieces of evidence the theory uses most directly. Peter temporarily takes over Lois's family's company, Pewterschmidt Industries, and during this period he operates with a level of competence and authority that his regular life never suggests he possesses. But more relevant to this theory is a conversation in that episode about legacy and what people leave behind. The conversation has no real payoff within the episode itself. It is not relevant to the plot resolution. It sits in the middle of the episode like something that wandered in from a different kind of story. The purgatory theory reads these orphaned moments, scenes that have an emotional weight disproportionate to their function in the plot, as bleed through, as moments where whatever is actually happening in Quahog surfaces briefly through the comedy before being covered up again. The seasonal structure of the show feeds into this reading in an unexpected way. Family Guy does not have a single continuous narrative, but it does have recurring cycles. Peter creates a disaster, the disaster unfolds, something resolves it, the family is restored to its starting position. This cycle repeats, with variations, across every season of the show. The specific content changes, the underlying structure does not. It is the same loop, run again and again, with different surface details each time. If you were designing an experience to help souls process something they were stuck on, you would design something that looks exactly like this. The same essential conflict, approached from different angles, repeated until something shifts. The fact that nothing in Quahog ever shifts is the evidence that whatever is being processed has not been resolved. The loop keeps running because it has not yet done what it is supposed to do. Peter's relationship with his father Francis, who appeared across multiple early seasons before dying in the season 5 episode Peter's Two Dads, is the emotional thread that the purgatory theory finds most significant. Francis Griffin was a hard, cold, withholding man. His relationship with Peter was defined by disappointment. He did not express pride in Peter. He did not offer warmth. Peter spent his entire childhood and adult life trying to earn something from his father that his father was constitutionally unable to give. When Francis died, that dynamic did not get resolved. Peter never got what he was looking for from his father. The wound that Francis left is still present
in Peter's behavior across every season that follows, visible in his need for external validation, his inability to tolerate being ignored, his compulsive seeking of attention and approval from anyone who will give it. In a purgatory framework, this unresolved wound is not incidental. It is the reason Peter is here, the thing he cannot move past, the thing the loop is designed to help him work through.
Every episode where Peter seeks approval and does not find it, or finds it briefly and then loses it, is the loop running, presenting the problem in a new form, giving Peter another opportunity to work through it. The fact that he never does, that he arrives at the start of each new episode in exactly the same emotional position he was in at the start of the last one, is the evidence that the work is not finished. Quahog keeps cycling because Peter, and everyone else in it, has not yet done what they are there to do. The Pewterschmidt family history adds a layer that the theory finds compelling. Lois comes from significant wealth. Her parents, Carter and Barbara Pewterschmidt, are alive across the show's run, and are depicted as cold, status-obsessed, and emotionally withholding in ways that mirror Francis Griffin's treatment of Peter. Lois chose Peter over a life of wealth and comfort, a choice her parents never fully accepted. This choice, and the ongoing tension it creates with her family of origin, is a wound that the show returns to repeatedly without ever resolving. The Pewterschmidts are never fully reconciled with the Griffins. The tension never fully clears. The same essential conflict between who Lois was supposed to be and who she chose to be runs beneath multiple episodes across the entire series, surfacing and submerging without resolution. Two unresolved wounds in the same household. Two people cycling through variations of the same essential pain. In a purgatory framework, they did not find each other by accident. They are there together because their wounds are connected. Because what Peter needs to work through and what Lois needs to work through are related in ways that require them to work through it together. The fact that they are not working through it, that they are instead cycling through it, is the condition of purgatory. Close to something, not yet there.
The town itself behaves in ways that support this reading beyond the individual characters. Quahog has been destroyed, damaged, threatened, and altered across dozens of episodes, and it is always restored. Buildings that burn down are standing again, neighborhoods that get leveled return to normal. The physical environment of Quahog is as immune to permanent change as its residents are. The town resets because the town is a container, not a place. Its purpose is to hold the experience, not to be the experience. It cannot change because it is not alive in the way the people in it are alive. It is the waiting room. Waiting rooms do not renovate themselves based on what happens inside them. They simply hold the space. The sound and visual texture of the show carries this without announcing it. Quahog always looks the same. The lighting does not change with the seasons in any meaningful way. The neighborhoods look identical regardless of what time of year it is supposed to be. There is a flatness to the physical world of Quahog that live-action shows do not have, and that even other animated shows handle differently. Quahog looks like a place designed to be background, not a place designed to feel inhabited. Because in the purgatory theory, that is exactly what it is. It is the backdrop for an experience that is happening to the people inside it. The experience is the point. The town is just where it is being held. None of this is resolved. None of it is even acknowledged within the show's own framework. The Griffins do not know they are in purgatory. They cannot know. The whole system depends on the not knowing. If they understood what Quahog was, the loop would mean something different to them. It would become unbearable in a way that would either break them or break the loop. Instead, they move through it with the cheerful amnesia of people who wake up every episode fresh, ready to make the same mistakes in slightly different ways, unaware that they have been doing this for longer than any of them can remember. __quote_5___. But if Quahog is a place where people are held and cycled through their own unresolved damage, it raises a question about the person who seems most capable of operating outside that damage. Because Lois Griffin is presented as the stable center of the household, the one who has it together, the one who keeps everything from completely falling apart. And there is a theory that says this presentation is the most carefully constructed illusion in the entire show, that the person everyone in the Griffin house relies on to be safe is, by a significant margin, the most dangerous one there. Section 7. Lois is the most dangerous person in the house. Everyone is afraid of the wrong Griffin. The show wants you watching Peter. Peter is loud. Peter is destructive. Peter drives his car into things, starts feuds with chickens, accidentally burns structures down, and creates the kind of chaos that fills 22 minutes of television with reliable efficiency. He is the obvious danger in the household, the one you keep your eye on, the one the show signals through volume and frequency and sheer scale of
disaster is the source of the family's instability. But Peter's damage has a ceiling. It is wide damage. It spreads across a lot of surface area and makes a tremendous amount of noise. What it almost never does is go deep. Peter's cruelty is impulsive, not calculated. His harm comes from not thinking, not from thinking carefully and choosing harm anyway. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. And the person in the Griffin house who operates in the second category, who is capable of calculated, chosen, deliberate harm while maintaining a surface of warmth and reasonableness, is not Peter, it is Lois. The dangerous Lois theory holds that Lois Griffin, presented across the show's run as the family's moral center and the adult who keeps everything functional, is in reality the most psychologically complex and genuinely threatening person in the household. Not because she is evil in any simple sense, but because she possesses something Peter entirely lacks: the ability to decide to hurt someone and then do it with control and precision while appearing to everyone watching to be perfectly reasonable. Peter causes damage the way weather causes damage. Lois causes damage the way a person causes damage, with awareness, with intent, with the ability to stop and the choice not to. The episode that opens the case most clearly is the season 4 episode, The Cleveland-Loretta Quagmire.
Loretta, Cleveland's wife, has an affair with Quagmire. The situation is handled as the main plot, with Peter and the friends navigating the fallout. But in the middle of this episode, there is a scene where Lois confronts Quagmire about what he did. The scene is not played for laughs in the way most Lois scenes are. She does not deliver a gentle moral lesson. She is sharp, she is cold, she is precise in the way she identifies what Quagmire did wrong and what it cost Cleveland. The warmth she normally carries is completely absent, and the person standing in that scene is not the Lois the show usually shows you. It is something underneath the usual Lois, something that does not need the warmth because it is not performing for anyone in that moment. It is just operating. This version of Lois surfaces across the show's run with enough regularity that it cannot be dismissed as a one-time tonal inconsistency. In the season 3 episode Lethal Weapons, Lois takes up a martial art called taijutsu and discovers she is extraordinarily good at it. Not competent, not a natural, extraordinarily good, in a way that the episode frames as a revelation, but that the theory reads as a confirmation. The skill emerges too fully formed to be a new discovery. Lois moves through the physical training with the ease of someone accessing something that was already there, not learning something new. By the middle of the episode, she is not just practicing the martial art, she is using it on people, with a level of controlled aggression that the show cannot quite decide whether to play as funny or alarming, so it plays it as both simultaneously. The episode does not end with Lois having learned a lesson about restraint in any way that holds. She pulls back within the episode because the plot requires it, but the capability does not go away. The show established it, put it in the footage, and moved on. The theory does not let it move on. The theory holds that what Lethal Weapons established about Lois is as permanent as anything else the show has established about any character. She is physically capable of controlled violence. She knows how to hurt people with her body. That is information about who Lois Griffin is, and it sits alongside everything else the show tells you about her in a way that changes the picture. Her history before Peter is the next layer. Across multiple episodes, pieces of Lois's past surface that do not match the composed, domestically focused woman the show presents as her default identity. She had a relationship with Gene Simmons, the musician, which is mentioned in a way that suggests it was not a brief or casual thing. She had a period of significant personal wildness before settling into her current life, referenced across various episodes with enough consistency that it forms a pattern rather than a collection of jokes. She comes from the Pewtersmith family, one of the wealthiest families in the show's universe, which means she grew up inside a specific kind of privilege and a specific kind of coldness. Carter Pewtersmith, her father, is not a warm man. He is calculating, status-driven, and comfortable using people as tools when the situation calls for it. Lois grew up watching this. She absorbed it. The composed, reasonable surface she presents as an adult did not emerge from nowhere. It was built on top of something that her upbringing installed in her, and that something is visible in the moments when the surface slips. The Pewtersmith coldness shows up in how Lois handles the children when the show is not actively centering her as the good parent. Her treatment of Meg, already covered in the previous section, is one expression of it, but her treatment of Chris and Stewie across various episodes carries a similar texture when you watch for it. She is attentive when attentiveness is easy. She is present when presence costs her nothing. In the episodes where being a present parent would require genuine sacrifice or genuine confrontation with her own behavior, she finds reasons to be elsewhere. She is not neglectful in the dramatic, obvious way. She is neglectful in the
careful way, the way that leaves no clear evidence because it always has a reasonable explanation.
Stewie's consistent desire to kill Lois across the early seasons of the show is played entirely as comedy. A baby wanting to kill his mother is absurd. The gap between Stewie's sophistication and his target is the joke. But the theory asks a question the show never seriously engages with. Why Lois specifically? Stewie has complicated relationships with other characters. He has contempt for Peter, he has genuine affection for Brian, he has a range of responses to the world around him. But his desire to eliminate Lois is singular and specific in the early seasons. It is not generic villain behavior, it is targeted, and the target is always her.
The straightforward answer is that Lois is the primary caregiver, and therefore the primary source of authority in Stewie's life. And his desire to kill her is a dark comedic expression of the universal toddler frustration with parental control. This is probably the intended reading, but the theory offers a different one. Stewie, who, as established in the simulation theory, is the most perceptive person in the Griffin house, has assessed Lois and identified something in her that the rest of the family does not see. His desire to remove her is not about control, it is about threat assessment. He has looked at the people around him and determined that Lois is the one who requires the most serious response. That is not a reading the show confirms, but it is a reading the show's own established characterization of Stewie makes possible.
The season 7 episode Steroids contains a moment where Lois, responding to a situation involving Chris, makes a decision that is quietly ruthless in a way the episode does not fully highlight. She identifies what outcome she wants, assesses what path gets her there fastest, and moves along that path without visible internal conflict. The scene is brief. It is surrounded by other content, but the decision-making visible in it is not the decision-making of someone who is led by warmth and care. It is the decision-making of someone who knows what they want and knows how to get it. The warmth is the presentation. The goal-oriented calculation underneath it is the reality. Her marriage to Peter is the most sustained piece of evidence and the most complicated one to interpret. Lois chose Peter. This is established fact within the show's universe. She had other options, wealthier options, better connected options, options her family preferred and pushed toward her. She chose Peter specifically. The show presents this as a love story. Lois loved something real in Peter that the wealth and the status and the family pressure could not compete with. This is probably true, but the theory adds a layer. Lois also chose someone she could manage, someone whose chaos, however exhausting, is legible and containable in ways that a more capable partner would not be. With Peter, Lois is always the most competent person in the room. She is always the one with the plan, the judgment, the reasonable response. She is never challenged, never pushed into a corner by someone who matches her. The Lois underneath the warm surface, the one who emerges in Lethal Weapons and in the cold confrontation scenes, and in the moments when her Pewterschmidt inheritance shows through, would not thrive with an equal. She thrives in the position she has constructed. And Peter, whether he knows it or not, is part of that construction. This does not make Lois a villain. The theory is not arguing that. It is arguing that the show has built, across its entire run, a character whose interior life is significantly darker and more complex than the role she plays in the household suggests. That the warmth is real, but it is not the whole picture. That underneath the patient wife and the involved mother and the voice of reason in an unreasonable house, there is a person with a history and a capability and a set of instincts that the show occasionally lets surface before pulling the curtain back down. The surface Lois is who she is some of the time. The other Lois, the one who moves through a confrontation without warmth, who accesses physical capability that feels pre-existing, who makes calculated decisions with the ease of someone for whom calculation is native, is who she is the rest of the time. The show gave you both. It just surrounded the second one with enough jokes that most people watched it, registered it as a funny tonal shift, and moved on. The theory says you should not have moved on. The theory says the second Lois is the first one with the performance dropped. And the performance across however many seasons has been very convincing, which is, depending on how you think about it, either reassuring or the most alarming thing about her. __quote_6___. If Lois is more dangerous than she appears, then the Griffin house contains at least two people performing versions of themselves that do not reflect what is actually underneath. That raises a question about the children, specifically about Chris, who is so often read as simply a younger, less experienced version of Peter, because there is a theory that Chris is not just similar to Peter. Chris is the evidence of what Peter was before something happened to him. A before picture, a portrait of a man the show has been running in reverse, showing you the original while the copy sits in the living room pretending not to know what he lost. Section 8. Chris Griffin is what
Peter would have been. There is a scene in the season 4 episode The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire where Chris draws a picture. It is not a plot point. It does not advance anything. The camera holds on it for a moment, the other characters react briefly, and the scene moves on. But the picture is genuinely good. Not good in the way a child's drawing gets called good by a parent trying to be encouraging. Good in the way that makes you pause. The proportions are considered. The detail is specific.
There is something in it that goes beyond what you would expect from a heavyset teenager who the show has established as slow, easily confused, and socially lost. The show does this with Chris repeatedly. It drops evidence of a real artistic gift into scenes that are not about the gift, gives it just enough space to register, and then buries it under whatever the episode actually needs Chris to do. By the end of any given episode, Chris is back to being the simple, good-natured, not particularly sharp son. The gift gets filed away, the plot moves on. And the pattern, across enough seasons, starts forming a shape that the Chris is what Peter would have been theory finds deeply significant. The theory is this: Chris Griffin is not just similar to Peter Griffin in surface ways. He is Peter Griffin at the beginning, before the world got to him. Before whatever combination of his father, his circumstances, his own choices, and the specific gravity of Quahog pressed him down into the shape he currently occupies. Chris carries, in an early and unfinished form, everything that Peter might have been if the conditions of his life had been different. The kindness, the creativity, the physical presence without the aggression, the social difficulty without the cruelty, and the artistic ability that Peter, in a handful of scattered moments across the show's run, also reveals and then immediately covers up. Start with the physical parallel because it is the most obvious and therefore the most dismissed. Chris and Peter look alike. This is a joke the show makes openly. They are drawn with the same basic body shape, the same face structure, the same physical proportion. The show uses this similarity for comedy in multiple episodes, having characters confuse them or comment on the resemblance. Because the similarity is played for laughs, most viewers absorb it as a visual gag and move on. The theory says the visual parallel is not just a gag. It is the show's way of flagging a deeper connection that it is not going to explain out loud. The deeper connection is behavioral. Chris, like Peter, is impulsive. He acts before he thinks. He says the wrong thing at the wrong moment with the cheerful obliviousness of someone who did not register that there was a wrong thing to say. He struggles with school in ways that mirror Peter's established history of struggling with anything that required sustained intellectual focus. He has difficulty reading social situations and frequently ends up on the wrong side of them without fully understanding how he got there. These are Peter's traits, running in Chris at a lower intensity and without the years of accumulated damage that have turned Peter's version of them into something more destructive. But Chris also has things Peter has lost, or buried, or had pressed out of him by the time the show begins. The artistic ability is the most important one. In the season 6 episode, Peter's Daughter, there is a brief moment where Chris shows a drawing to a family member, and the response is genuine surprise at the quality. In the season 8 episode Crisscross, Chris's artistic perspective becomes briefly central to the plot and is treated, within the episode, as a real and functioning gift rather than a punchline. The show keeps returning to Chris's art in a way that it does not return to any other positive trait the character possesses. It cannot quite let it go. It keeps putting it back in the footage, in small doses, as though it is important in a way the show has not fully decided how to articulate. Peter had something similar. This is the part of the theory that requires the most careful attention to the evidence, because the evidence is scattered and easy to miss. In the season 3 episode, Peter Griffin, husband, father, brother, there is a sequence involving Peter's history that touches on his early life before the show's present timeline. The version of Peter in these glimpses is not the Peter the audience knows. He is softer. He is trying in ways that the current Peter has largely stopped trying. He is not yet calcified into the fixed identity the show runs him on. He is still becoming something. And what he was becoming, before the calcification set in, had more in common with Chris than with the Peter sitting in the living room chair in every episode of the show. The relationship between Chris and his maternal grandfather, Carter Pewterschmidt, is one of the theory's quieter pieces of evidence. Carter is cold to almost everyone. He is openly dismissive of Peter across the show's entire run, viewing his son-in-law as beneath the family in every measurable way. But Carter occasionally treats Chris differently. Not warmly. Carter does not do warmly, but with a flicker of something that functions like recognition, as though he sees something in Chris that he does not see in Peter. The theory reads this as Carter seeing potential. The kind of potential that Peter once had, and that Carter's daughter chose to attach herself to before it was fully realized, and which then, under the weight of Peter's life, was never realized at all. In Chris, that potential is still present, still early,
clearly, still possible. Carter, who is ruthless enough to assess people accurately even when the assessment is inconvenient, can see it. The friendship dynamics of the two characters run in parallel in a way that supports the theory.
Peter's core friendships are with Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe. These are not relationships built on shared depth. They are relationships built on shared geography and shared habit. The four of them drink at the Drunken Clam because they have always drunk at the Drunken Clam. The friendship is maintained by proximity and routine more than by genuine connection. There is affection in it, real affection, but it is the affection of people who have been in each other's lives so long that separating would require more energy than staying provides. Peter chose, at some point, to stop reaching for anything deeper than this. The Drunken Clam is where his social world ends, and it has been where it ends for a very long time. Chris, at his age, has not yet made that choice. His social struggles are real, and the show depicts them consistently. He has difficulty connecting with peers, he says the wrong things, he misreads situations.
But underneath the social difficulty, Chris is still open to people in a way that Peter is not. He still wants genuine connection rather than comfortable routine. He still reaches, he still tries. He has not yet arrived at the settled, defended social posture that Peter operates from. The theory reads this not as a difference between the two characters, but as a difference in where they are in the same trajectory. Chris is early in the process that produced Peter. The reaching and the trying are still present because the defeats that ended them for Peter have not fully accumulated yet. The season 5 episode, Peter's Got Woods, contains a moment where Peter and Chris are in the same scene, responding to the same situation, and the difference in their responses is sharp enough to be instructive. Peter's response is defensive, quick, aimed at protecting himself from any outcome that requires vulnerability.
Chris's response is slower, more open, more genuinely engaged with what is actually happening in front of him. They're looking at the same thing and seeing it differently. Peter sees a situation to be managed. Chris sees something to be experienced. That gap, the theory argues, is the distance between what Peter was and what Peter became. And the thing that closed that gap was not stupidity, not cruelty, not any single event. It was time. It was Quahog. It was the specific, grinding, repetitive weight of a life that never quite became what it was supposed to be, pressing down on someone who eventually stopped pushing back. The artistic gift is where the theory becomes genuinely sad. Peter's relationship with creativity across the show is a graveyard of abandoned things. He has started projects, businesses, creative endeavors of various kinds across multiple seasons, and almost none of them have produced anything that held. The show frames this as comedy. Peter thinks he can do things he cannot do. His attempts are disasters. The gap between his self-assessment and reality is the joke. But a few of these attempts are not straightforward failures. A few of them produce something real, briefly, before circumstances or Peter himself shut it down. The theory reads these moments as the original Peter surfacing, the one who had the gift before the gift had nowhere to go and eventually went quiet. If Chris is where Peter started, then watching Chris across the show's run is watching a clock. Every episode where Chris's kindness gets taken advantage of, every episode where his social openness leads to embarrassment rather than connection, every episode where his artistic gift gets noted and then set aside is a tick. The clock is moving. The process that produced Peter is running on Chris now, slowly, in the background of whatever the episode is actually about. Chris will not always be the open, reaching, still possible version of this character. Quahog does not allow people to stay open. It presses them. It repeats. It runs its loop. And at some point, across some future season that the show may or may not ever make, Chris will stop reaching. He will find his version of the Drunken Clam. He will build his settled, defended identity. He will become something fixed. The question the theory leaves open is whether what he becomes will look like Peter or like something different. Peter's specific shape came from Peter's specific wounds, Francis Griffin's coldness, the particular way Quahog received Peter's early attempts at being more than the show allows him to be. Chris has different wounds forming. Lois's particular brand of managed distance, the social failures that are accumulating quietly across his teenage years, the gift that keeps getting acknowledged and never developed. Whatever Chris becomes will not be identical to Peter, but the theory holds that it will be recognizable, that anyone who watches both characters carefully across the full run of the show will be able to see, in whatever Chris eventually settles into, the outline of his father's trajectory, a different path that arrives at a similar kind of closed. The show did not intend this reading. Chris is comic relief, a source of easy jokes about teenage confusion and mild stupidity, a background character in most of the episodes he appears in. But the evidence the show put into the footage does not disappear because the intention was comedy. Chris Griffin is drawn
drawn from Peter Griffin's blueprint and placed 25 years behind him on the same road. What that means for where Chris is going is the theory's most uncomfortable implication, and what it means for how you watch Peter, knowing now what the beginning of his road looked like, is something the show never quite meant to make possible, but made possible anyway. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if Chris represents something that was lost in Peter over time, the show's history contains a character who represents something that was lost in Stewie, a version of Stewie that the show began with and then slowly moved away from, without ever fully explaining why. The early Stewie was darker, more focused, more genuinely dangerous in a way that was not comedic. And there is a theory that this earlier version did not disappear, that it was pushed down, that it is still there, sitting underneath the Stewie the show eventually settled on, and that the buried version and the surface version are not two phases of one character's development. They are two separate personalities sharing one body, and the buried one has never been fully quiet. Section 9. The Evil Stewie Theory. The split is real. Watch the pilot episode of Family Guy, and then watch any episode from season 6 onward. The baby in those two episodes is not the same character. Not in the way characters naturally shift over a long run of television, not in the way voices settle or animation styles smooth out, or writers find a more comfortable version of a personality they were still figuring out in the beginning. The difference between early Stewie and later Stewie is not a refinement. It is a replacement. The thing that was driving Stewie in the first 2 seasons of the show, the specific engine underneath all the jokes and the accent and the elaborate plans, is a different thing than what drives him in the later seasons. And the question the Evil Stewie theory asks is not why the character changed, because characters change, showrunners make creative decisions, tones shift. The question it asks is what happened to the original? Where did the early Stewie go? Because the theory's answer is that he did not go anywhere. He is still there, underneath, waiting. The early Stewie, the one the show launched with, had a single consuming focus. He wanted to kill Lois. Not as a running gag, not as an absurdist comedic premise that the show winks at while making clear nothing will ever come of it. In the first 2 seasons of Family Guy, Stewie's desire to kill his mother is treated as a genuine, ongoing plot. He builds weapons specifically designed for her. He develops and executes plans with real operational detail. He comes close on multiple occasions to actually doing it. The show surrounds all of this with comedy, yes, but the intent underneath the comedy is not comedic. Early Stewie means it. He has a goal. He is working toward it. And the sophistication of his plans, the patience of his planning, the genuine menace in the way he moves through scenes where Lois is present, all of it reads as real rather than performed.
There is also the matter of his relationship with world domination.
In early seasons, Stewie's stated goal extends beyond Lois. He wants control, global control. He builds devices in his room that are designed not for play, but for actual operational use. He has a board in his room in early episodes with plans on it. Real plans. Plans that are connected to real goals that Stewie is genuinely, methodically working toward. The comedy of this comes from the contrast. A baby doing this. But the content underneath the contrast is not played as though Stewie himself finds it amusing. He is serious. He is committed. He is, within the logic the show established in its first 2 seasons, actually dangerous. Then something changes. The shift does not happen in a single episode. It does not come with an explanation or a scene where Stewie decides to be different. It happens gradually across seasons 3 and 4, so slowly that most viewers absorb it without registering it as a change. The world domination plans fade. The Lois assassination attempts become less frequent, less detailed, less genuinely threatening. The menace drains out of Stewie's scenes and is replaced by something else, something warmer and more comedic and more flexible as a character tool. By season 5, the Stewie who wanted to kill his mother and conquer the world has been almost entirely replaced by a Stewie who goes on road trips with Brian, makes pop culture observations, and provides comedic commentary on the family's situation. He is still brilliant, he is still unusual, but the darkness that defined him at the beginning is largely gone. The Evil Stewie theory does not accept that it is gone. The most direct piece of evidence is the episode Stewie's Been Cancelled from season 3. In this episode, Stewie temporarily loses the attention of the family and the household. What follows is a portrait of what Stewie does when he is not being watched, and what he does is not sweet. It is not the warmer, more accessible Stewie that the show was already beginning to transition toward. It is the original Stewie, running without the social performance he puts on for the household.
Doing what he actually does when no external pressure requires him to be anything other than what he is. The episode is played for comedy. The content underneath the comedy is a reminder that whatever the show has started to smooth over in Stewie's presentation, the original material is still there when the smoothing is removed. The Season 4 episode, Stewie Be Good, introduces the concept most directly relevant to the theory, though not by name. In this episode, Stewie has a near-death experience, and it produces in him a temporary shift toward genuine warmth and openness. He is kinder. He connects more easily. He seems, for the duration of the episode, to have access to a version of himself that is uncomplicated by whatever drives his normal behavior. The episode treats this as a phase, something that passes when the circumstances that produced it resolve. But what it establishes, by showing a Stewie who is capable of this warmth, is that the warmth and the darkness are not sequential.
They are simultaneous. Both versions of Stewie exist in the same body at the same time. The circumstances determine which one is operating on the surface. The Road 2 episodes are where the two Stewies most visibly share space. These episodes, beginning with Road to Rhode Island in Season 2 and continuing across multiple seasons, pair Stewie and Brian in travel-based adventures that take them away from the Griffin household and into situations where the normal rules of the show do not fully apply. In these episodes, Stewie is at his most accessible. His relationship with Brian is warm and genuine. His humor is playful rather than cutting. He is, across many of these episodes, the most likable version of himself the show produces. But even in these episodes, in moments where the plot puts genuine pressure on Stewie, the original version surfaces. The coldness returns. The calculation returns. The specific quality of someone who is performing warmth rather than feeling it flickers through before being covered again. The Road 2 episodes are not evidence that Stewie has become purely the warmer version. They are evidence that the warmer version is what Stewie allows himself to be when conditions permit, and conditions do not always permit. The relationship with Brian is the most important piece of evidence the theory has for the split being real rather than a simple character evolution. Stewie loves Brian. This is as established as anything in the show. The Brian and Stewie episode, the Mercy Pact, the road trips, the genuine distress Stewie displays in the Life of Brian death episode, all of it confirms that the connection between them is real and runs deep. But the way Stewie loves Brian has a specific texture that the theory finds significant. He loves Brian with a kind of desperation that does not match the rest of his personality. He is protective of Brian in ways that go beyond affection into something closer to need. He tracks Brian's well-being with an attention that the warmer Stewie on the surface does not fully explain. The theory's reading of this is that Brian is the anchor the warmer Stewie uses to stay on the surface. The original Stewie, the one who built weapons and planned assassinations and moved through the world as though other people were obstacles or tools, had no such anchor. He did not need one because he was not trying to be anything other than what he was. The warmer Stewie that the show transitioned toward needed something to hold on to, something to remain present for, a reason to keep choosing the surface version of himself over the one underneath. Brian is that reason, which means the desperation in how Stewie loves Brian is not simply affection. It is the desperation of someone who knows that losing the anchor means losing the surface, means the other one coming back up.
This is why the Life of Brian episode, in the context of this theory, hits differently than it does as a straightforward plot event. When Brian dies in that episode, Stewie does not simply grieve. He falls apart in a way that is disproportionate, even given how much he loves Brian. He is not functional. He cannot manage the loss. And in the weeks depicted in the episodes between Brian's death and his restoration to the timeline, Stewie's behavior becomes erratic in ways the show depicts as grief, but that the theory reads as something more specific. Without Brian as an anchor, the surface Stewie has nothing to hold on to. The original begins to push through. The Stewie in those post-death episodes is not just sad. He is destabilized in a way that grief alone does not fully explain. He is losing the thing that has been keeping the split manageable.
The physical evidence in the show's animation supports this if you watch for it. In early seasons, Stewie's physical movements have a specific quality. He holds himself differently than he does in later seasons. His posture is more deliberate. His movements in scenes where he is planning or executing something have a controlled, precise quality that is distinct from his movements in casual scenes. As the show transitions toward the warmer Stewie, this physical specificity softens. His movements become more expressive, more comedic, more accessible. But in the episodes where the original surfaces, even briefly, the old posture returns. The same controlled deliberateness, the same quality of someone
who is not reacting to the environment, but moving through it according to a plan. The body remembers what the show has tried to put away.
Seth MacFarlane has acknowledged in various interviews across the show's run that the early Stewie was a different creative conception than the later one. He has described the shift as a deliberate creative decision, a choice to move away from the genuinely dark version of the character towards something more flexible and more usable across different kinds of stories. This acknowledgement is important because it confirms that the shift was real and intentional, but it also confirms what the theory argues. There was an original. The original was replaced. The replacement was a choice, not a natural evolution. And choices, unlike evolutions, do not eliminate what came before. They cover it. What the evil Stewie theory argues is that the covering is not complete, that the original Stewie, the one with the single consuming focus and the genuine menace and the plans that were real plans,
did not stop existing when the show stopped foregrounding him. He went underneath. He became the thing that surfaces in pressure situations, in grief, in moments when the conditions that make the warmer version sustainable are temporarily removed. He is the explanation for why Stewie's love for Brian has a desperate quality that warmth alone does not produce. He is the explanation for why Stewie's fourth wall breaks sometimes carry a weight that comedy alone does not require. He is the explanation for why, across 20 plus seasons of a show that has tried to settle on a consistent version of this character, Stewie still occasionally does something that makes you feel, briefly and uncomfortably, like you are watching the pilot again. The split is not a theory about bad writing or inconsistent characterization. It is a theory about what happens when a creative decision tries to replace something rather than develop it. The original Stewie did not become the later Stewie. The later Stewie was placed on top of the original Stewie, and the original was told to stay down. Most of the time it does. Most of the time, the surface holds, and the warmth is present, and the Road 2 episodes are fun, and the friendship with Brian is lovely, and everything about Stewie is accessible and comedic and easy to watch. And then something shifts, and for a moment,
in the posture or the coldness or the specific quality of focus in his eyes when the plot has backed him into a corner, you see the original looking back out. Still there, still waiting, still running whatever plan it has been running since the pilot, quietly, underneath everything the show built on top of it. __quote _8__. And if Stewie contains something original and buried that the show has been managing and covering for 20 years, the Griffin house itself may be doing something similar, because there is a final theory about the house on Spooner Street that has nothing to do with the family living in it now. A theory about what was in that house before the Griffins arrived, about the history the house carries that the show keeps almost revealing and never quite does, about why certain things happen in that specific building that do not happen anywhere else in Quahog. The house has a past, and the past, according to this theory, has never left.
Section 10. The Griffin house is haunted by a previous family. The house at 31 Spooner Street has been in the background of every single episode of Family Guy since 1999. Most viewers have never looked at it carefully, not at the house itself, not at the building as an object with a history that predates the Griffins moving into it. The show does not encourage this kind of attention. The house is furniture. It is the container the family lives inside, the backdrop the stories play out against, the establishing shot the camera uses before cutting to whatever Peter is doing in the living room. It is not supposed to be interesting on its own. It is supposed to be invisible in the way that all good backgrounds are invisible, present without demanding to be noticed. But the house demands to be noticed if you watch carefully enough, not loudly, not in the dramatic, obvious way that a haunted house in a horror movie demands attention, quietly, through the accumulation of small things that individually have reasonable explanations and collectively form a pattern that reasonable explanations stop covering, through the moments when the show almost says something about the building itself and then pulls back, through the specific, recurring way that certain things happen inside that house that do not happen anywhere else in Quahog, through the history the show has never fully told but has never fully hidden either. The haunted house theory holds that the Griffin home on Spooner Street is not simply an address. It is a location with a past that is still present, that the family or families who occupied that house before the Griffins left something behind that has not cleared, that the strange, cyclical, reset-resistant quality of life inside the Griffin household is not purely a function of the Griffin family's own dysfunction.
Some of it is coming from the building, some of it was already there when Peter and Lois moved in. And the show, across its entire run, has been leaving evidence of this in places most viewers were not looking, building. Start with the structure of the house itself, because it does not behave consistently. The interior layout of the Griffin home changes across episodes in ways that cannot be explained by renovation or the normal visual inconsistencies of animation. Rooms appear that were not there before. The basement is treated as an established part of the house in some episodes and does not seem to exist in others. The upstairs layout shifts. The relationship between rooms changes. In animation, this kind of inconsistency is common and is usually explained simply as different artists drawing different episodes without a precise shared reference for the space. This is a fair explanation,
But the haunted house theory finds it insufficient for the Griffin home specifically, because the changes are not random in the way animation errors usually are. They follow a pattern. The house seems larger in episodes that take place primarily inside it. It seems to have more space when the plot requires more space. It accommodates what is needed and withdraws what is not. It behaves less like a fixed structure and more like a responsive one. The basement is where the most direct evidence lives.
In the Season 2 episode, Let's Go to the Hop, there is a brief sequence that takes place in the lower level of the Griffin home that establishes the space as having a specific atmosphere distinct from the rest of the house. The lighting in that sequence is different. The sound design is different. The way the characters move through the space carries a slight but perceptible tension that the show does not apply to other areas of the building. The episode does not draw attention to this. The basement appears for its plot purpose and the episode moves on. But the texture of that space, the specific way it feels different from the cheerful chaos of the main living areas, is the show accidentally showing you something about the building that it did not intend to highlight. The history of the house is touched on across multiple episodes without ever being fully explained. In the Season 3 episode To Love and Die in Dixie, the family temporarily relocates and the house is left empty. What happens to the house during this period is not shown. The family returns and everything is as they left it. But in the episode following their return, there are two brief moments where characters react to something in the house with a flicker of unease that the episode does not explain or follow up on. These moments are so brief that they function as blink and miss it details in the larger flow of the episode. The theory does not claim these moments as conclusive evidence. It claims them as part of the pattern. One unexplained moment of unease in a house is nothing. A recurring pattern of them across multiple seasons is something else. Peter's relationship with the house itself, distinct from his relationship with the family inside it, has a specific quality that the theory finds significant. In multiple episodes, Peter displays an attachment to the building that goes beyond normal homeowner sentiment.
He has fought to keep the house, sacrificed things to keep it, made choices that prioritize the house over more logical alternatives. In the Season 4 episode, The Courtship of Stewie's Father, there is a sequence where Peter talks about the house in terms that go slightly beyond what the scene requires. He describes it with a familiarity and a possessiveness that sounds, in the context of the theory, less like someone talking about a building they own and more like someone who feels claimed by a building as much as they claim it. This is a reading the show does not intend, but the language is there in the footage, and it sits differently once you are looking for it. The neighborhood context matters. Quahog is established across the show's run as a place with a genuine history. It is not a generic animated town that exists only as backdrop. It has been around long enough to have layers. The Pewterschmidt family, Lois's family, has been part of Quahog's history for generations.
The town itself is referenced across multiple episodes as having a founding, a colonial past, a set of families whose names and histories are woven into the place. Spooner Street exists within this layered history. The houses on it are not new. They were built at some point by someone for someone, and the families that have passed through them have left the kind of invisible residue that old houses and old towns accumulate without anyone intending it. The show has referenced previous owners of the Griffin home in passing across multiple episodes without ever making them a sustained focus. These references are brief and are usually in service of a joke or a minor plot point, but they establish that the Griffins are not the first family to live in that house. People were there before. The show knows this and periodically surfaces it in small ways. What the show does not do is tell you anything about who those people were, what their lives in that house were like, or what they might have left behind when they left. The haunted house theory reads this deliberate vagueness not as unimportance, but as avoidance. The show keeps almost going there and keeps pulling back. The pullback is the tell.
Death has a specific relationship with the Griffin house that goes beyond the show's general attitude toward mortality. Characters have died in or immediately adjacent to the house across multiple episodes. Some of these deaths are played as jokes, some are played with more weight. What is consistent is that the deaths cluster around the building in a way that stands out, even within a show that treats death
death as a resettable condition. The house at 31 Spooner Street has seen more death in its immediate vicinity than any other location in Quahog. The theory does not claim this is supernatural causation. It claims it as pattern. Things happen around that house that do not happen at the same rate anywhere else in the show's geography. The recurring structural anomalies of the house connect to this. In the Season 7 episode, Peter's Progress, there is a sequence involving the Griffin home's history that reaches back significantly further than the Griffins themselves. The episode uses a framing device involving past lives and historical versions of the characters, and within this framing, the house at Spooner Street appears as a location across different historical periods. This is played for comedy and should not be taken as literal canon, but what it establishes, even within its comedic framing, is the show's awareness that the land the Griffin house sits on has a history that predates Peter and Lois. The land has been significant across time. The building on it is recent relative to the land's history. What the land remembers is older than any of the families that have built on it.
The way children experience the house is the theory's most specific piece of evidence. Stewie and Chris both behave differently in certain areas of the house than they do in others. Stewie, whose sensitivity to his environment the simulation theory already established, has episodes where his behavior in specific rooms of the house carries a quality distinct from his behavior everywhere else. He is more alert, more watchful. There are moments in early seasons where Stewie moves through the house at night and the animation gives his movement a specific quality of someone who is aware of being in a space that is not entirely empty, even when no other characters are present. These moments are brief, and they are surrounded by comedy, and they are easy to absorb as stylistic choices rather than meaningful content. But they are there, across multiple seasons, in a way that suggests they are not entirely accidental. Chris has spoken to things that are not there. This is not a dramatic claim about a single major episode. It is a pattern of small moments spread across the show's run, where Chris, in the background of scenes set inside the house, appears to be responding to something that the other characters and the camera do not acknowledge. The show never draws attention to these moments. They are background details in scenes about other things, but the theory has cataloged them, and the catalog is longer than coincidence comfortably explains. The house's location on Spooner Street has a specific significance within the show's geography that most viewers do not register because the show does not foreground it. Spooner Street is not in the center of Quahog. It is not adjacent to the locations the show uses most frequently for its public scenes. It sits in a specific part of the town that the show's geography places at a slight remove from the busiest areas. The houses on it are established as older than many parts of Quahog. The street itself has a quality in how the show draws it, in the colors used, in the way the light sits on it in establishing shots, that is marginally different from the rest of the town. This is an animation observation rather than a plot observation, and therefore the least conclusive piece of evidence the theory rests on, but it contributes to the cumulative picture. Spooner Street looks like a place with history. The Griffin house looks like the place on that street where the history concentrated. What the theory ultimately argues is not that the show has been building a haunted house narrative that it plans to resolve. Family Guy is not that kind of show and was never going to be. What it argues is that the creative decisions made across 20-plus seasons about the layout inconsistencies, about the deaths that cluster around the building, about the previous owners never explained, about the way certain characters behave in certain rooms, about the land's history surfacing in comedic framing devices that point towards something real underneath them, have accumulated into a portrait of a building that is more than a backdrop. The Griffins did not move into an empty house. They moved into a house that already had a shape to it, a personality formed by whoever lived there before. The dysfunction inside the Griffin household is real, and it belongs to the Griffins, but the container that dysfunction plays out in is not neutral. It is not simply walls and rooms and a roof. It is a place that has held other people's lives, other people's damage, other people's unresolved things. And in the way of old houses and old towns, it held on to all of that when the previous occupants left. The Griffins moved in on top of it. They built their chaos on top of whatever was already there. And every episode, every reset, every cycle of the same mistakes in the same rooms adds another layer to what the house is holding. The building at 31 Spooner Street has been absorbing the Griffin family for over 2 decades now. It absorbed whoever came before them for however long they were there. At some point, a house stops being a place where things happen and becomes a thing that makes things happen. The show never said that out loud. It never needed to. It just kept putting the Griffin family back inside those walls, episode after episode, season after season, and trusted that the walls would do what walls in houses like that always do. Hold everything in. Let nothing go. Wait. If you enjoyed this video essay, make
make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.